You are about to journey against the current of contemporary thought and beyond the troubled waters of daily news to the very source of our extraordinary culture. You are going upstream with Cashill and Edge.
Okay, here we are once more live at the Real Media Studios in Overland Park, Kansas. Multimedia operation here.
Love this place.
Yeah, they're good enough to host us. And they do all kinds of stuff, so give them a call sometime. This is Jack Cashill.
I'm Loy Edge.
And
This
we're
is
going
upstream.
Upstream. That's where we're going, where the source of the culture is. We leave politics downstream, as Andrew Breitbart asked us to do.
Let all the hoi polloi swim
Yeah,
around
anyone
and
could do
deal with
that. Any daily
Yuck.
podcaster could talk about that. But we talk about major, big cultural
That's
things.
right.
You know, I was in France a few weeks ago.
Again?
Again, I go about not that often, but I go periodically to keep up my French. And I raised that subject, to show off that I was in France.
Of course. You got to brag. You got any pictures?
Well, actually, you know, I did
Show me your baguette or your whatever.
I normally don't take pictures, but
Cafe.
on Facebook, I had to establish the fact that I have conspicuous leisure that I can indulge that other people may not be able to.
Oh, yeah.
So I found the opportunity. Actually, my wife had gone ahead to Paris. We were visiting friends in eastern France, in the city of Nancy. But I drove back by myself to Paris, and I was going to stop at Verdun, the famous site of the World War I battle. And I was cutting across the country, not on the main roads, and I came across an American cemetery from Saint Mihiel, the famous Saint Mihiel salient. It was really the first major battle the Americans were in World War I. This was in September of 1918. And I pull up, and there was almost no one there. There's like one or two cars at the gate. I didn't think it was open. So I walk in, and now I'm walking. I didn't see anyone around. I'm walking diagonally through the graves, reading the names, seeing who was there, seeing if I knew anyone, old friends, grandparents, whatever. And this woman starts walking up towards me, and I'm expecting the worst. I don't know why. She and I'm expecting her to say, "Get off the grass." I'm expecting to be Karen'd.
Right.
And she comes up to me and says, and we established it pretty quickly that her English is better than my French, that, "Would you like a personal tour of the cemetery?" Right? And I said, "Yeah, sure." I will add, I hate to say this, I hope my wife's not listening, but she was like 25, beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
It was just a classic.
Yeah, again.
Right out of a movie,
They follow you all over the place.
And I raised this issue, and because I think it's apropos to our subject. We're talking about chivalry in this episode, which comes from the French word chevalier,
Right.
meaning horseman. Right. And I will say this about the cemetery. It is the most beautifully maintained real estate in Europe. I mean, this is true of other American cemeteries as well. Meticulously maintained.
Who's taking care of them?
Well, we take care of it. We have a committee that takes care of it.
Who's we?
The United States. But what they give us is the real estate and the property, and there's no taxes and all that sort of stuff. So it's a nice blend between the French and us. It speaks to the spirit of what we're talking about, chivalry, the art of basically respecting and taking care of other people.
Well, it actually started more as a military thing. Knights.
Yes, it did. You're right. And the chevalier means horseman,
right?
Which is basically a knight. And it comes, I think the idea was introduced in the 12th century poem, Song of Roland, a French epic poem. But part of it was very Christian. Mm-hmm. It was the notion that God was watching you. That even if you're in battle, right, that there are
God.
I mean, or even for secular causes.
Or king.
Right, for king, because part of the chivalric oath was to your king, to your liege. But one major part of it was to respect and protect women and children. And the question is, have we lost that sense in the contemporary era? Well,
it's kind of, I think when you're looking at that, you there again, we go back to our friends in 1914, 1917.
Right.
All these great, monumental intellects who are God on earth, who were going to fix everything for us.
Right.
Well, they screwed this one up too. They used chivalry as their last great gambit to drum up sentiment, emotion, passion, to get to get our people to go to war against each other.
Yeah.
World War I. In World War I, they used chivalry images, all sides, the Central Powers,
Right.
the Allies. They had all the knights and the horses slaying the dragons and the damsels in distress and come do this for God and country and all this stuff. Well, it worked. It was a great recruitment vehicle.
Well, what they depended on was the sense of honor.
That's right.
Patriotism,
Chivalry.
loyalty. I mean, these are all virtues.
That's right. And they said this is the time for great men to show their chivalry, to show that they are great knights in defense of all these great things.
Yeah.
Well, after that horrible, nasty bloodbath, all that crap was gone.
It wasn't gone. It was,
Chivalry had to be redefined
yeah.
culturally because it was no longer helpful to use that old knight battle military. It kind of just became then a much more mainstream. It meant just good values and taking care of women and being and giving and protecting and all that.
Well, certainly what it meant was the end of of the actual use of cavalry to fight a battle. I mean, cavalry could not beat, it's like rock, hammer, scissors. Cavalry does not beat machine gun,
Right.
In fact, the cavalry became tanks. We switched from horses to tanks. So now we still use the term cavalry, but we use it for tanks. Sometimes we use it for helicopters. But you're right. It had as a large scale notion for inspiring people, chivalry shrunk.
It got spent in
Yeah.
World War II, basically.
Well,
World War
War
I.
I, yeah.
Kind of got spent.
What's interesting is, and I didn't even think about this until I was just looking at some World War I history. Here I am on this battle of the cemetery. It's all crosses, by the way, or Stars of David. So everyone was, and it was 99% crosses. It was
No inverted pentagram.
no question marks, yeah, right? No satanic symbols, no blank spots. It was the assumption that this is a Christian nation fighting in a forgotten country. We didn't start fighting in that war until September 1918.
Really?
Yes. We'd been there. I mean, they had to get the troops there, and there was some
1918? I thought it was 17.
as an
Wow.
entity. Well, no, there was Americans first started going. The war was declared 1917.
Mm-hmm.
There were advanced units, et cetera. But as an integral American military operation,
Mm-hmm.
this was the first one, and those guys were at that cemetery. In November 1918, it was all over. And I may have mentioned this, but some years ago, it was actually, I know exactly what year. It was 2018, because I was in France in November trying to avoid the election. And I sought out a small town that was going to have a ceremony for the 100th anniversary of the armistice, right? And all of the symbolism of the chivalric era was still on display. It started with a mass. And then we had a parade to the cemetery with all these school children and all these like 4,000-year-old guys with medals on their chest and running.
Wow.
And then the kid sang the La Marseillaise, which is so the notions of patriotism, honor, God, all linked together in this one package still exists as a memorial kind of rendition. But whether it has any value in real life, I don't know. We don't see much of it.
At least it's a ceremony that calls it to mind.
Yeah, right.
It's completely forgotten otherwise.
Going back to 1914, an event happened in 1912 that establishes in our own mind what the notion of chivalry is for non-combatants.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm referring here to the Titanic and the whole mythology spawned around the Titanic. And what is that mythology in your mind? What do you take away from that?
The mythology?
I mean, the reality, actually. It wasn't just mythology, but it's the myth and the reality are the same as to how people reacted when the Titanic started to sink.
Okay, well, I'm not really that into the Titanic story, and I don't know a lot about it, except I do know the conspiracy theories right now about why those people were taken out. But the women and children first,
right.
Is that what you're dealing with?
Right.
Yeah.
Women and children first.
Which was always, when we grew up, it was in cartoons, comic books.
Everywhere.
Television shows. Superman would say it. The Rifleman would say it.
Right.
I don't care. My favorite Martian would say it. But all those things were repeatedly ingrained in our minds.
And in the case of the Titanic, even though they've tried to diminish the art of what happened, is that a higher percentage of women in third class survived than men in first class. The men did back off. I mean, the men did yield their places in these lifeboats to women and children, and they died in far greater numbers, percentage-wise and in reality. And this included a lot of prosperous big shots. I mean, this is to take an ocean cruise in 1912 was no big deal. Oh, it was a big deal, rather. I take that back.
I mean, they had steamer trunks, and I mean, that was
right.
a major
It was
deal.
elegant, right?
Yeah.
Right. And then as the ship is sinking, the band they're playing Nearer, My God, to Thee. So this was 2 years before the beginning of World War I. So these virtues were still very much inculcated into the upper classes. And those were the people who were setting the rules. And they were the ones who gave up their lives to see that those rules were honored. And that's the word honor there is now, did you see if you didn't see it, you're the only one who didn't see it, the James Cameron movie, The Titanic?
I did not see it.
There you go.
I bet, Jack, I don't go to movies.
But you know enough about Hollywood to know what they would do with this, right? I mean,
yeah.
Did you know James Cameron at all? Had you ever met him? He's a big classic, limousine liberal. There's got to be a better word for that now. What's the word for a private plane progressive or something, private jet progressive. And he's got tons of money. He's got, millions of houses and dollars, and he's made a lot of money. He's made a lot of successful movies. Titanic was very successful. But in the movie, as you might anticipate, the men in first class were all swine.
Of course.
And it was our hero came from the third class. And even though he was alleged to be an Irish immigrant, Leo DiCaprio, I didn't buy. I mean, I was sympathizing now with the people in first class. And they're all, they don't. It's a class. It's like bad Marxism, right? Packaged into this stupid, visually spectacular movie. I was wishing that Julian Fellows had written the script. He's the fellow who makes Downton Abbey, which does do a good job of capturing that whole code and that whole spirit of what American and British society was like in the early 20th century when these codes were honored and and there was a value to it, and they understood that value. From the lowest classes up to the top, there was a certain honor to it, but I don't know.
Well, and people were known in a different way. We talked about our neighborhoods and the intimacy that everybody had with every human being in a 2-3 block area, and their pets and their mom and their mailman. I mean, you knew everybody. There's accountability differences there are accountability differences when the world transitions to online, virtual,
Right.
corporate, all of the relationships, there are strains on accountability and on transparency.
And on behavior.
You know, so on behavior, people who, you know, we talked about the topic of chivalry. The first thing that popped into my mind was the slap down I got from some lady for holding the door open for her about 10 years ago. And it's happened to me twice, but the second time was particularly rough. I was out to lunch with some business associates. It was one of those double door restaurant things. You go through the breezeway, and we were walking in. I was the last one. I'm lumbering in there, and I see this woman coming up behind me. So I stand there and I hold the door and I wait for her and I smile, and she's a middle-aged gal and looks pretty normal, but she gets up and she goes, "Oh, well, thank you so much. Don't you feel like a big man now?
Wow.
That you've held the door for a lady?" And, you know, the most embarrassing thing to somebody who talks and writes for a living is when you go, it's like, I so didn't expect that I don't have. And finally, and I just stood there and looked at her, and I said, "Lady, I hold the door open for everybody." "Oh, well, that's okay then."
Well, and that's part of what we're talking about here today. I mean, we've lost the larger sense of chivalry. We're not, you know, Roland on a horseback, you know, fighting Saracens. But what we can do on a daily basis is to behave civilly and courteously.
Oh, no, you can't. I was told.
Right. Well, you get your hand slapped. That's how far it's broken down. I had an experience in a supermarket, not quite like that, but there were two women with shopping carts on either side of the aisle, right?
Uh-huh.
And I didn't want to disturb them and ask them to move, so I just kind of maneuvered between them. And the woman went, and just as I'm getting by, the woman says, sotto voce, she goes, "Slug right through there, asshole," right? And then I realized that there was some national association of bitchy women in town or something.
Yeah.
And so you're left, what do you say, you know? And I said, "Nice mouth, lady," you know, and that's the kind of exchanges we're left having today. You know, it's really unfortunate, but it's true. By the way, the French have an expression, esprit d'escalier, which means staircase wit, right? And the classic staircase wit is you're at a dinner party, you're walking down a staircase, and then you realize, why didn't I say that?
Oh,
You know?
yeah.
I had one not too long ago. I have a Jewish friend.
Oh, staircase wit.
A Jewish friend was telling me how, you know, he was a good guy, and he said that Jesus was Jewish, you know. And then about a minute later, it dawned on me, I should have said, well, on his mother's side, you know. But I missed the opportunity, so I couldn't go back and jam it in there, you know.
No.
But so, yeah, and we're left speechless because we have expectations of how men and women should behave with each other, which were inculcated into me as a boy.
Yep.
I mean, we went to the car, we walked to the car, my mother would stand outside the car waiting for one of her three sons.
Yep.
Her husband knew
Come around and open the door.
Open the door. And we would be trained to do that. It was part of the understanding that we had as kids and as young men and as adults. And we tried to honor as much as we could. But you're right, you get your hand slapped enough that you begin to pull back from doing the things that are basic and decent. And young guys today, now people have probably been saying this since Socrates, but you know, when I see young men today, they don't even know about these rules, right?
I tell you, even, you know, I had great relationship with my parents, but my grandmother, who was from the 1890s, born in the 1890s, she's the one who filled me in on all the nuances of chivalry, as we now know it.
Right.
And so I knew to step on the outside, closest to the sidewalk.
Right.
And she would explain to me that it was because back when they had horses, there was a lot of splashing of very unpleasant stuff, and horses that would go wild. And she'd say, now it makes sense today because of cars. They splash and all this, but it really was more important than, I mean, she explained, I'm 6, and she's telling me this stuff.
Well, you got to learn that young, right?
She really inculcated me, as you say, to all of these things that have gone away.
Yes.
I mean, and you notice, you just watch, it becomes less and less and less integrated into our culture.
Oh, you're right. In fact, it's odd that you mentioned that, because I was taught that too. You walk on the outside of the
toward the street
the street side, always. And that once came into play. I was in New York City, and just for the reason you just said. And it was I could see there was slush all over the place. I could see this cab coming. They don't care, right? And the girls with me on the inside, it was my date at the time, and I had a big heavy overcoat on, so I turned my back to the slush and caught it all. I mean, it was a massive slush thing, right? But at that time, and certainly with this girl, she understood. She got it, right? And so there was a payoff. Not immediate now, I would say it was, like, wasn't pay for play or something, but it was appreciated, right? Mm-hmm. Now, especially because I've been traveling a bit, and the bins, especially on international flights, are very high. So if you have a suitcase, you have to be tall.
Yep.
Not only somewhat strong, but you got to be tall. So a lot of women are really determined to get their own suitcases up.
Yes, I know. I've seen that.
But they can't reach, right?
I know, and I love that.
And so then they're put in that awkward position. And then they find some 19-year-old lunkhead standing behind them who doesn't know enough to stand up to help them with that, or maybe afraid of the consequences of doing that. Mm-hmm. So, it's like the rebellion. Like, so there'll be I'm sure there'll be class action lawsuits against high things. Like there are class action lawsuits now against jelly jars. The last refuge of male pride is
I'm
opening
so mad
jars.
About them jelly jars. I'm glad they're suing them.
Well, thank God that they continue to make jars. Otherwise, marriage would dissolve altogether.
That's right, because what good would that man be?
As an institution. But, when you start with the little things, you get to the big things. And in America, oddly, I think that chivalry has had a longer and stronger tradition than any place else in the world. For the reason that
the religion hasn't completely collapsed.
That's right. And historically, we were the most biblically literate country in the history of the world. And this shows up during the lead up to Civil War and Civil War itself. So, and now there's the interesting reaction of feminist scholars about the Civil War. Because before the Civil War, both in the North and the South, Sir Walter Scott was extremely popular. He's the guy who read Ivanhoe and all these, books about chivalry, right? And, Mark Twain blamed him for starting the Civil War because everyone was filled with this romantic notion of the whole Gone with the Wind notion. You've seen Gone with the Wind, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. So tell me you've seen Gone with the Wind.
I have seen that.
Okay, good. I was going to say, I was going to hire a substitute if you hadn't seen Gone with the Wind. And that was and it was probably captured the spirit of the times, where they couldn't wait to rush off to war and all. But what they did have during that time, during the Civil War, was a very well-honored code of not mistreating women. And that, we're here in Kansas. One very famous incident took place not far from here, and that was with Quantrill.
Mm-hmm. Quantrill's raid.
Right, on the town of Lawrence, which could use a good raid right now, by the way. Clear out that hornet's nest of ladies with pink hair and, whatnot. But so there's 400 guys. They're all roughnecks. They're not regulated by any formal military code. They are going to make what they thought was a suicide raid on Lawrence because their sisters and wives had been taken captive by the Unions and held in a prison in Kansas City. The prison collapses. Several of them die or are injured. So they're in a vengeful spirit. So before they descend on the town of Lawrence, which is a basically Union abolitionist stronghold.
It's just outside of Kansas City,
That's
by
right,
the way. It's where KU is.
Right, it's about 45 minutes away now. Then who knows how long it took to get there. They stop on a hillside, top of a hill, and Quantrill is 26 years old, and like I say, not a formal, trained leader. He points to a tree, and this story is held up pretty well, and says, anyone who so much as touches a woman, I will personally hang from this tree, right? So they ride into town, and they kill like 150 boys and men. And there's not a single woman molested, attacked, raped, injured, right? Which probably added to the humiliation of the loss, oddly. But, at the same time, they honored that code. And the Union Army typically honored that code. There's very few instances in the Civil War of mass rape or things like that you would have, and that the German women after World War II would have welcomed the chivalric code among the Russians, say, who were coming in, or during the Balkan Wars or any current wars we face. So what do feminist scholars do when dealing with this history, right? Mm-hmm. They were really in a quandary. Mm-hmm. I read several articles by them trying to say, well,
how do you vilify that behavior?
How do you vilify that behavior? Exactly. Especially from the Southern guys, right?
Well, that's the trap you fall into when you're trying to assign phony attributes to a group
when you have
to fit your political narrative.
Warring identity politics, So
yep.
Where do we go? And so how do we resolve this? Do we continue to honor the code or what?
No, I got to tell you, I think it's done.
Yeah.
I think it's done. And I mean, in our current cultural perspective, because of how deeply established the media, academia, corporate culture, all these things they're still making headway, this progressive movement toward whatever they consider women's rights.
Right.
I consider it to all be ridiculous and a loss of rights for everyone and a loss of individualism. But it's still going that direction, I think, further, where these manufactured rights and all these other things have taken over any normal, logical progression of society and made everything into a Hegelian dialectic argument to advance their antithesis.
I think we saw an interesting case where these values come into collision a few weeks ago on a New York City subway train, right?
Okay.
Strange guys up there.
Oh, yeah.
Harassing women,
Poor
threatening
guy,
them, yelling and screaming. Now, what he counts on is for what we typically blame men for doing, which is nothing. He counts on them doing nothing.
That's right.
Turning their head, looking at a book or cell phone, or making believe they're not seeing what they're seeing in front of them. And
we can all think of many, many reasons. Mostly it comes from shaming and all that.
Right.
Why people wouldn't react.
Right.
I'm going to get sued. I'm going to be a villain. I'm going to get shot. It goes on, but mainly it's because they've been shamed into that behavior.
That passivity.
What they've taken away when we lost what we're calling chivalry, we also lost other things like noblesse oblige.
Right.
It's gone.
Right.
So if I'm a upper middle class person and I see these desperate, dirty, poor, crazy people fighting, there was a time when it would be, oh, here, gentlemen.
Right.
My little man, what are you doing? Well, this is not right.
That's
blah,
right.
blah, blah. Well, now it's like,
That's
I'm
right.
going to read this book and get the hell off of this train.
And that's normative. And so the people like Jordan Neely, in this case, the character in question, felt he had an open range there to do what he chose to do.
Nobody's going to,
What he didn't count on,
Marine.
a Marine. And the Marine did exactly what I hope that I would do under that same circumstance. He did exactly what any red-blooded young man should have done.
Bingo.
And he took him down. And he held him for 15 minutes. Had the guy not die, even in New York City, even in contemporary New York City, the Marine would be the hero.
Well, it should be pointed out, he was white.
Yes.
The other victims or would-be victims were black.
Yeah.
The people who he assisted with the takedown or who assisted him, at least passively, or supported him verbally, were black.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, but his whiteness
sure.
and the victim's blackness.
That's what they used after the fact.
Right.
They turned.
Yeah. I couldn't believe that they were going to do that.
No.
I thought it was one instance where everyone would say he did exactly what he should have done. Right?
That's right.
He didn't mean to kill him, obviously. It's not a chokehold. You chokehold a person in a minute, not 15 minutes. You know, that contrasts that with what, do you remember Bernie Goetz?
Yeah. Subway.
Vigilante?
Vigilante.
Right, the Death Wish guy from like the Charles Bronson in real life. I saw actually on Netflix they did a media. They were doing a reviewing media from the past.
Yeah,
they did a fair story on this. I had forgotten. I remember Bernie Goetz, but I forgot how universally loved Bernie Goetz was by the media and by the people of New York, black and white. Right, crime had gotten out of control in New York. Bernie Goetz pulls out his pistol, shoots 4 thugs, right? And he's a hero. When it turned out that he'd actually shot them after they were down, it colored his heroism, but the initial wave of his response and reaction, pure hero, right? That's just 40 years ago.
And he was a bespectacled nerd.
Right.
Kind of looked like Bill Gates or something.
Right, nerdy engineer type guy, quiet, kept to himself.
Pocket protector, quiet, kept
right.
to himself.
And
what was really, I think that was, of all the issues that Bernard Goetz thing brought to the fore, I think the one that it was most impacted was the concealed carry.
Yeah.
Because at that point, the argument was still very, very subdued. They really had the gun people pretty quiet at that time, if I remember right.
Yeah, it wasn't. The guns wasn't the issue. Right?
It wasn't the issue.
When you look at the media, you know, the treatment of it as I saw in this one documentary. But Goetz was, and then it spawned the Charles Bronson Death Wish series, where the vigilante basically takes upon himself the role of the chevalier when society has broken down, when culture has broken down. He does what he has to do to protect the women and children in his life and in his world, right? And that was like a very popular franchise. He made about 4 or 5 of those. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I saw the first. It really gets into kind of vengeance porn after a while, but it goes a little far. But
like Falling Down.
Yeah, right. That movie, I saw that.
I didn't see it, but I loved
the concept of it.
Concept and the character he played.
That is of the nerd who breaks down and finally decides to take the law in his own hand. But is that very impulse, that very instinct, is becoming so lost that when we see it in other people, it seems to me if I was a male New York subway rider and I had the moment and opportunity to respond and I didn't, I'd be forever shamed, right?
Yes.
There's a very good movie that came out a few years ago, and the title of it eludes me. You wouldn't have seen it anyhow. I believe is a Scandinavian movie, Swedish or Danish or whatever. And it's about this guy who takes his family on a ski vacation, and they're at a nice resort, and they're sitting out on the deck having breakfast or lunch or whatever, and it's sunny, but it's cold. It's obviously and they hear this noise, and there's an avalanche. They see an avalanche building coming right towards the deck. Right.
I hate that.
When that happens, gosh. And the guy has 10 seconds to think of what he's going to do. He abandons his family and takes off, right? And the thing passes them by. But his wife and his children just saw what he did, right? And they can never put that back together again. The family.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that concept.
And sometimes you only have seconds to make up your mind, right? And so the way you prepare yourself for it as a boy growing up, through scouting and your friends and gangs and whatever,
Comic books.
and reading adventure books, action adventure books like Call of the Wild or whatever.
Right.
All of these books are training you that when the moment comes,
Yes,
you'll be ready for it.
that's right.
And when those props are taken away, when there's no one telling you this, when there's no one, encouraging you, when the books you're reading are all about fairies, literal, not, a lot of books are about literal fairies. And you look at reading lists, they're all written by girls for girls, or for girls about boys that are, there's none of this. Jack London doesn't get read anymore,
Yep.
So you're not ready anymore when the moment comes, and you don't even know to be ready, but you'll know you should be shamed when you don't rise to that occasion, and that is what it seems to me we're not training young boys to do, or to know, or to be ready.
Not at all.
No.
That's done.
Now, did you read as a kid? Did you read action adventure books?
Not much.
What kind of reading did you do as a boy?
Not much.
Classic comics, maybe? Archie and Jughead?
I read a little Archie and Jughead, but I had deals. I had people in the comic book business feeding me free comics.
But even Superman and Batman.
Love that stuff.
They prepared you.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I did. I mean, I did some normal stuff. I was a scout.
Yeah, right.
So I read all that stuff over and over and fantasized about all that. And, wow, if I could whittle better, I could build one of these. I mean, did all that. And didn't read a whole hell of a lot.
Well, but Boy Scouts inculcated those virtues.
Yeah.
Trustworthy, loyal, courteous, kind, friendly, brave, godly. I forget them all, but I'm an Eagle Scout. And I was an Eagle Scout. I am an Eagle Scout. Scouting has kind of left me a little bit because they've bent their knee. We spoke about ritual humiliation in our last show to the gods of wokeism.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, as a kid, it was a great training to become an adult male who's able to bear responsibilities for the things that you're going to face in the world, and to behave so when the avalanche comes, you're not running and hiding. You have to fight that instinct, and it's a learned process.
Nobody likes to rush into the fire.
Yeah, and yet what happened in New York last month will make subway riding all that more dangerous going forward.
It's over. We've reached critical mass. We've passed the tipping point of, I did not think that Rudy Giuliani could possibly have the impact he had in a short time.
Oh, incredible.
Can that happen? Can they pull that same rabbit out of a hat twice and do it even on a larger scale the second time? That's really praying for some long, odd stuff to happen.
Well, you have to think about the New York of 1980. I mean, Giuliani was elected, I think, 91 for the first time. Or was it 93? 93, maybe? Because they do an odd number of years. But let's see. Maybe 91. No, it was 93. because he was up for election again in 2001 was an election during September 11th. He wasn't up, but there was an election going on that year. So he was elected in 93. I mean, the Bernard Goetz decade had just passed. The people who lived in New York then were New Yorkers. A lot of them were outer borough people who had grown up there. They were construction workers and cops and firemen and, tunnel diggers and whatnot. Now the people who inhabit New York are little wokies, right?
And foreigners.
And a lot of foreigners. I mean, the foreigners who have yet to integrate into the culture.
Yeah.
I mean, there are always foreigners in New York.
I mean, real balkanized.
Don't know where I am, foreigner.
Balkanized foreigners.
Right.
In no-go zones.
Right, who do not identify with the culture of New York City, like, say, the Italians and the Irish and the Puerto Ricans and whatnot did. And so that he was elected. He was a Republican, elected mayor by people who were tired of having their sandboxes sullied by bullies, who were tired of the thugs that Bernard Goetz took out, right? I don't see that now.
And this is a real poignant issue. I talked to a guy in L.A. who just finished a film about the thing that happened maybe in the Capitol. Yeah. And I said, how'd that go? He said, it went all right. I go, well, you don't sound that excited. He goes, nobody cares. He said, what I found out is you have all kinds of horrible injustices going on, and they're now exposed.
Yeah.
Everyone can see them. There's no doubt about it. It's confirmed, and they're not even hiding it, and nobody cares. And there's all kinds of crap going on, like people languishing in jails for things they didn't do, people being fired for things they didn't say, people, he goes, it's more exposed now. People didn't believe any of this stuff a year and a half ago.
Right.
He goes, now it's out on the table, and they're saying it, and you can see it, and nobody's doing anything. And he said, I hate to say it, but I'm kind of losing interest.
Yeah, I hope that doesn't happen too much, because when you have cities like Washington, D.C. or New York City, where the juries have become like the juries that tried the Scottsboro boys in Alabama, where their minds are made up beforehand and they're afraid, or like the juries in Minneapolis who convicted those cops. I mean, the Scottsboro boys got more justice than those Minneapolis cops did.
Yeah.
They were actually finally exonerated.
That wasn't court. That was humiliation ritual.
And when the citizens of a given metropolis don't have the will, don't even know the rules anymore of what they're supposed to be I'm not talking women, as men, don't even see themselves as different, couldn't even define themselves as different than a female, aren't willing to go to that minimal step, then you're going to get guys who do the right thing, charged with homicide. And the norm will be when you see something like that, like you say, like a woman being attacked, you take out your cell phone and you rush to your Instagram account and try to get some likes out of it. That's where we're going. I don't think it's irreversible, though. That's why I'm such a Pollyanna compared to you. I think it's.
That's right. I'm a realist, and you think the FBI is salvageable. Nah.
I think the FBI. I don't think the media are salvageable. The current contemporary media, I think, are the real culprits in just about everything we're seeing.
They're definitely right there, right behind it.
Right, and that's part of what I'm talking about here. Because now you have, newsrooms filled with soy boys and women, right? And reporters of a generation ago, a lot of these people came up from the streets. They had real jobs. They were real men and real women who had families, who commuted, who weren't sitting in apartments cowering. And when the Black Lives Matter mobs march down the street and throw bricks through your window, you say, I'm with you, right? You saw those videos, right?
I wonder what that guy's doing now. Oh, we're with you.
I guess they kind of deserve what they get. I was just reading this as a closing remark here. I was just reading The Time Machine by H.G. Wells.
Uh-huh.
Do you are familiar with the story?
Yes.
He goes back in time, or no, he goes forward in time, many, many years forward. And he finds two classes of people. One of the Eloi,
Right.
who are these frail little, little boys and girls who are happily being taken care of and fed and whatever. And the Morlocks, right? I think that's where our cities are now. Morlocks, who are eating the little people, they don't know it yet, and the Eloi, right?
Well, the Eloi are about to see their property values take a big dive, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because if you're in an incorporated area where they say defund the police and we're a sanctuary city and we need to let people out of jail because they're the wrong color
Right.
or whatever their idiocy is, that's not going to be good in the long term. And we're about to hit some really, really rough patches when it comes to violence caused by economic disruption.
It can happen.
Any day.
Any day.
It could happen.
Yep.
So you've got to, regardless of all these great theories of how the Republic is gone and we're going to be at war and there's going to be the collapse of the dollar, you can go on and on and on. But what it really comes down to in the end is when there's a lot of disruption and you can see the writing on the wall with these things like the way these cities are operating with without concern for safety.
Right.
It's going to be like cowboys and Indians out west day.
And
Wild, Wild West. Oh, the savages are coming. We need to secure the perimeter. I mean, literally that kind of hand-to-hand combat with people who want to shoot and steal the stuff that you have because they're desperate and they're hungry, and you have their stuff in their mind because they've lived in Brookside longer than you have. Whatever the case is,
Right.
It doesn't matter. It's going to come down to crime. It's just crime.
And it's going to come down to who's ready to
And you
deal
got
with
to
it
get ready.
and who's not. Right.
Just be prepared for.
In other words,
Have your friends that are your friends communicate with them and say, if it gets really violent around here, here's what we're going to do.
exactly.
We're going to meet here. You got a gun. You got a gun. We're going to have rotating guard duty on our neighborhood. Whatever it is you want to do, be like that, be like the Boy Scouts and get that kid prepared.
Be prepared. That's our
Be
motto.
prepared.
I'm an Eagle Scout. And I feel that obligation.
Do you feel it's that time?
No, not yet. Close. It will take something had to happen, like the EBT cards go down, right?
Right.
But we're almost there.
Yeah.
So, but be prepared in any case. On that cheery note,
Hey,
it takes.
we'll
Pollyanna's
see you next week if we're
bitch-slapped here
still
at the
around.
end of the show. Okay, take care, guys. And
Slapping the Pollyanna around.
thanks again to our host here at Real Media Studios in Overland Park. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.